Hello, anybody there?
Hey, Jaime. It's Martha. How are you?
Oh, I'm great. Great to meet you. Get to talk to you.
Yeah, great to talk to you too.
So I'm very excited to have this chat. Where are you at these days? You're in California, is that right?
Yeah, I'm California, Northern California. So bottom of the San Francisco Bay.
Wonderful.
So.
We're going to get to talk about a lot of things, especially family dynamics and relationships. But first of all, I want to congratulate you on Bliss Road, which is an amazing work that I got the chance to take a look at this week. And I had such an easy time going into the world that you were sharing with us, your world. And I'm very excited to know, I guess, first and foremost, before we set the stage on everything, how you're feeling now that this is out in the world.
I think it's really important that if you're going to publish a memoir, that you have processed everything enough that you feel fine and not like you're going to croak. Because if you feel so nervous and worried and vulnerable, then you're clearly not ready and there's still things to work through. And I actually felt that all while I was writing the memoir, is that I would have kind of periods of panic and then I would back off and recede. And then as I continued to work and continued to evolve the story based on my writers group critiques and comments from other people, I gradually learned more and more. And I even, going through therapy was fantastic, because it discovers these kind of bubbles of things that need to be discovered and insights that need to be made. And then once you get to a certain point, then you feel like you're ready. And it's funny because in my writing book, which I wrote in 2007, I actually counseled that wisdom before I had that wisdom, is that if you feel too worried about releasing a memoir into the world, then don't do it, because the chances that you're going to be resentful and hurtful to others and not helpful are much higher. So it was interesting to actually have to take my own advice.
Yeah, and one of the things I appreciated about the work was that you did such a great job of establishing what the concerns were very early on as you were sharing your own family story. But as we get further into the work, there is a kind of release of these concerns, and you are providing the solutions that have worked for you. And that was something that I thought was really interesting to have in memoir form. But before we kind of keep digging into it, I'm curious to know if you'd be able to share a brief synopsis of the perspective of the book, just to let the listeners know, if we could encompass Bliss Road in so many words, so that they know what the major through lines of your memoir are.
Well, it's the first ever memoir of its kind. Namely, that it's the first memoir by the neurotypical child of a autistic dad. And usually books are by and for autistic people, and there are thousands of them. But when I started looking for myself, I couldn't find any that related to the psychological impact of kids. And neurotypical, for your listeners, means that your brain pattern, so to speak, your brain type is within a certain span considered to be normal. I know that phrase even is problematic now because of people's sensitivity to neurodiversity. But because of that, it means that I was able to pick up on the lack of emotional bonding that occurred because my dad was autistic and lacked that ability. And so, and it's a hard thing to explain because, and that's one of the reasons that I went into laying the foundation. It's an almost invisible thing. So when you start telling other people, the response can almost be, what are you griping about? Nobody is very close to their parents, perhaps, and we all have our difficulties and such. But what I discovered is that it's a foundational lack of emotional bonding. And the good news is that, what I'm just discovering is that it wouldn't take much to really improve the parenting skills of neurodiverse parents. And that's a very hopeful thing, right? So that's what I'm really hoping is that we get researchers who are actually interested in this so that they can provide strategies to neurodiverse parents. And they can be very simple, but it should be from birth. It should be things like you have to hold your child for a certain amount per day. You have to look in the child's eyes. You have to actually talk to the child and things of that so that emotional bonding can occur. Because whatever emotional disconnect I experienced with my dad didn't occur when I was like 5 and I got upset with him for not understanding me. It happened at birth.
Right.
And so... Yeah.
And that was, I'm really glad that you selected one of your readings that hopefully we'll get a chance to do here in a moment about those initial stages of recognition that are so important. And I loved how there was this moment of almost therapy. And I don't mean to say therapeutic in a light way or anything, but I found it so powerful that you had this moment where you imagined yourself going back to that situation, that instance. And I thought that was one of the most powerful moments in the book, because I had to step back and just take a moment and say, can you imagine how much better things would have been had the parent had the tools? And that's all it is. It's not an attack. And yes, it is a very emotional aspect of it, but that's what I love about this work is that you're able to share, what if we had these tools, and what if we can keep working toward gathering more tools for these folks. And so I thought that was one of the more powerful moments of the book for sure.
It's very impressive because the neurodiverse community takes so much flack from others who don't necessarily understand that the tendency to want to get, upset or bristle immediately at any mention is because it reflects how much stress they've been under. So I want to make it really clear. I am from a neurodiverse family. I have neurodiverse members. I am not apart from it. I am within it. So I am part of this community. I'm just in a different part of the community. And therefore, I have no intention other than really good intentions, really good encouragement and inspiration, and trying to promote improvement. Because you're exactly right. Who wants to be a underperforming parent? Nobody. If you ask somebody, do you want to hurt your child? Their response is no, certainly not. So it's a matter of giving them the tools, which is exactly correct, which is exactly the process that has occurred all through time as we discover more and more about the brain. Similar to dyslexia, there wasn't a name for it, but scientists started noticing these problems with these kids and how come they're unable to read and so forth. And then they came up with a name for it. They came up with symptoms for it. They came up with strategies for it. So in terms of this process, we have a name for autism. We have the symptoms. And now it's a matter of looking at all of the angles of how to deal with it, not just from the autistic person's point of view, but the impact on kids.
Absolutely. And one of the more illuminating things for me was the way that you expertly went back and gave us the timeline of development. And I'm going to ask you a little bit more about your background in journalism and how that may have facilitated that. But if we could digress a little bit into how that came to be, how you were able to fashion the history of the research of this condition and your own family history. Can you describe a little bit what that process was like? Because it's two massive threads that are kind of getting woven in the pretty much the first half of the book as you're giving us the humane context of it and of course the research side of it. Can you tell me a bit about how that came to be?
Well, you can tell readers something. You can say, oh, the person was smart, but that doesn't mean the readers are going to believe it. Right? Telling them, what evidence do they have? And so that was the problem that I had. I said, hey, I could have told readers this had a profound psychological effect on me. And readers would have said, well, okay, show us. And so the only way to do that was to actually move up through time as studies about autism were taking place throughout history so that I could see the development, how it paralleled with my family, and to essentially get to the conclusion that there was absolutely no way that my dad could have been diagnosed for autism because of the timeline of research regarding autism. He was in his late 60s, early 70s by the time autism became a diagnosis. And, by then we were all off on our own. So we weren't living with him to, re-question his symptoms perhaps and his behaviors. Not only that, but he'd structured his lifestyle in a way that suited him. So he was very peaceful and well-grounded in his life. So why would we even consider having him assessed? Right? There was so much going on with kids and trying to get them assessed and stuff. So there's no reason. But then, of course, the problem was that my mom got cancer. And as soon as she got cancer and provided this big conflict for my dad in his head, that's what blew up mm-hmm. our thinking on the subject. Yeah. That's what caused us to really question, right? And so that was really important. It's like, unless you set the stage for how things came to be, people just won't understand.
Yeah.
And that makes sense to me. I mean, there's been any number of shows or books or anything, and you're left thinking, well, I don't really get it. And so, until you actually set the stage for them to get it, they mm-hmm. won't.
Right. So tell me a bit of your background in journalism, because it seems like you studied it and you went into that profession for quite a while. And can you share some thoughts on how that illuminated the way that you wrote this work?
I think I have used journalism every day of my life, especially, since getting my degree, because I think what it helps you do is gain a little distance as you do your research with it, which I think is really necessary, especially in really highly emotional situations like this. When I'm looking at my own family history and all the emotions connected to it, oh, how nice it is to be able to step back and look at this research and see, rather than constantly being confronted by anger or resentment or whatever I happen to be feeling. And journalism, it does a great job in having you question everything. And this is kind of an interesting point, because in our culture, it's like, we have a lot of problem with folks just, accepting whatever they hear. And I refuse to do that, because I wasn't trained to do that. It's like, you never do that. You always say, somebody says something and then you say, well, that's interesting. I'm going to go check that out. And so that was very important here to see how the research had built. And it has a certain amount of structure to it that you, and discipline, I say, is that you don't leave those T's uncrossed. Mm-hmm. And especially, it's like, somebody had said to me, an acquaintance, they were saying, autism was, caused by, vaccines. And yeah. So I was like, whoa, so it caused me, it was really good. I didn't have an immediate response, but it was really good because it caused me to go back and look at all that and understand the situation, which was really important,
Yeah. And I think one of the more impressive aspects of this whole thing is how level-headed the expression of your life story was. And I mean, just goes back to what you were saying earlier, that you really had to work through a lot of this stuff. And how long did this work take from the moment that you started working on this, or can you share a bit about that particular aspect of the work? How long did this take you to put together?
Well, the whole experience, it took about 10 years, but the actual writing took about two years or so. I guess, and I had tons of false starts, because it's so kind of massive and, octopus-like that I had to, had to really figure out where to start and so forth. That was an interesting process. Once it got going, I think once I got my footing, like say after about a year, then it just kind of flowed. And the most interesting point was that at some point the poetry just came into it. All the poetry was written in that time period. And for your listeners, don't worry, it's not a poetry book. Instead, it's essentially a poem that starts each different segment. And the idea is that was directly related to that period, so that you can see this transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And ironically, I was so closed down emotionally that the only thing that was working was poetry. That's the only way I could talk to myself. I had no way to. I was so closed. I had no way to express myself. It was kind of a shocking situation because I've written all my life, and so forth, and to discover exactly how emotionally shut down you are is pretty shocking.
Yeah.
Because you're thinking, I'm living this fine life. I've got these two kids, and I look like everybody else, and yet you're just you're just a mess.
Yeah.
And internally a mess. And yet you have to get up and you go to work and nobody notices anything different. But it's really, I really feel for people, especially, they always say, oh, these folks, they just implode and they go do these drastic things. And, I guess if each of us could really understand that you're never going to know what somebody else is feeling unless they want you to know. And if they don't, they won't. But you shouldn't assume that there isn't a tornado raging inside them. So it's like being able to reach out to, especially people who tend to be really quiet and, or they seem disturbed or something, it's no big, deal to say, hey, if you want to go to lunch sometime, or if you, want to talk about it a little bit, they might not be able to, but it's better than just saying, oh, well, I'm going to give up.
Yeah.
It's like, ask them, what's your story? What's going on here?
Yeah.
So it might lead to some help.
Right. And I also think that you had a wonderful through line of addressing the generational aspects of this too, and how when the time came to have this kind of reckoning, when so many things were swirling negatively in your life with your mother's situation and your father getting worse or more overt in some of those symptoms, I love this idea that the way that you described it, which was what you were saying just now, which is just letting somebody know how you're actually feeling, and you understood that as an actual barrier that was existing, but culturally or because of the time period when you were raised, you just couldn't vocalize it. It couldn't materialize. And that was just so elegantly done, given the context of everything that was going on. But it's a lesson for a lot of us who, and I repeat this often in the podcast, but it's like not having the language, not knowing how to address something within ourselves. And even if it's just having something like a fragment of poetry to use as some kind of thread to get out of that situation or to start understanding yourself was very much well done. But I was just going to comment on the poetry there for a sec. But that was a very lovely touch because it was a break. There were some chapters that were heavier than others. They were, full of a lot of information and a lot of wonderful things that I didn't know about ASD, but you did a really wonderful job of giving us space to kind of sit through, with some of these things. Would you be interested in doing a reading?
Certainly. How about I start with the poem, and then we can consider going to the kind of the foundational shift issue.
I love that.
All right?
Yeah.
All right. So the book opens as a little bit of an explanation that I include in the book is that when I was coming to terms with kind of the exact size and dimension of this emotional shutdown, and I was in my 50s by then, my sister and I had gone kayaking, and we then afterward decided to stop at a winery. And she lives on the East Coast in Connecticut, a beautiful summer day, beautiful little winery, lovely gardens and so forth. And I happened to look up at the rural road on which this winery was set, and the sign said Bliss Road. And, it was a moment when the angel sang, because I thought, wow. So this is the moment. This absolutely encapsulated the journey. There is a sign, Bliss Road, naming a narrow lane atop a high New England hill. The letters written white, radiant in the glow of a dusk summer sun. The view beyond the sign, seeming forever, of tender green hills rolling easy around the blue cool of a calm lake. To cross the line, to reach the other place, takes but a few steps across an uneven width of black pavement in heavy, neck-breaking shadow. And that is the end of that. And that's exactly right. It's like you're just over there. And I assume everybody feels that sometimes. It's just over there. If I could just get there. It's so close. And yet it's a forever. How do I get over there? How do I get into the sunshine? How do I unburden myself from this chill,
And the neck-breaking work that it requires to get to that. Absolutely powerful way to set the tone. Really elegantly done there. So, looking at the way that you arranged this work, how did you find a way to organize this? Or can you talk a bit about the structure of the book and what led you to make these choices to begin the way that you did and to arrive where you did?
I think it's very interesting that every single writing project I do, and this may happen for you, I suspect it does, is that the subject matter delineates the form in which you write it. So I have done plays, short stories, flash, novels, and so forth. And one of the reasons I'm all over the place is because a subject matter has to be, the format has to fit the subject matter, not the other way around. And so that was very true of this one. So I tried chapter headings and so forth, and then it just really felt like these different periods of my life, and that's why it went into there are no numbers, there are no chapter headings. It's just segments of the life, so you could really see the certain focus, right? Very important initially, for example, to essentially lay out my dad and his relationship with us, right? And then it was very important to see how my dad and mom interacted, because they were a team, and she was his help through life, right? She was his assistant, and so forth, and how the impact that had, and so forth. So it was over time, and I am a big proponent of nothing is wasted. Nothing is wasted. So all of the back and forth and cutting and shifting and so forth that occurred had to occur. You cannot arrive at a finished product without all of that. So I never stress that, I shouldn't be taking this much time, or it's not fitting into a certain structure. It has to be what it's going to be, and that is creativity. In my opinion, that is a creative thought process. Is it has to flow.
Right. Right.
So
you mentioned. Sorry, I'm digressing again, but you got me thinking of
that's okay.
the way that you wrote about your mom in this book was really powerful to me, because you refer to her as the buffer, your father's buffer for a lot of the social situations that were occurring in their life. And how was your mom growing up? And just give us a little bit of background on her, because obviously a very pivotal a pivotal human being, in this narrative and in your life. And I'm just curious to know, just to illustrate her as a human being, and then we can talk about your dad too.
She was really great mom. She always wanted to be a mom, and she just have kids and be a mom. She was had a very upbeat personality, and she would sew. She would bake us cookies, and she would, she was like quintessential mom, which was great. And I think one of the reasons, and since I've talked to other people, is one of her greatest strengths is her empathy. She had a huge and a very defined sense of empathy toward others. She could listen to them. She could hear them. She could feel their angst. And so that was very important. I think that people who tend to be very empathetic kind of gravitate toward people who have trouble in that regard. And certainly folks who are autistic too, because it is missing a kind of a link in the communication system. And so my mom ended up being that bridge so for example, if my dad said something hurtful, my mom was able to come in her very chipper voice, oh, come on, it's going to be okay, and make us feel better and so forth. But which worked sometimes and of course didn't in other important ways. But she had no means of understanding his autism either. And I think we choose partners who we need for some reason. And for her, I think my dad was he was really safe. He was not a guy who was going to be running around on her or abusing her. And she was, my guess is that she probably suffered from anxiety, and based on, kind of her upbringing in this don't talk about it era, that is so debilitating for so many people. You're not taught to have emotions or to talk about them. And so she, she didn't like to rock the boat. And so she would smooth things over. Well, the problem with smoothing things over is that you don't necessarily stand up when you should. So, for example, one of the tools, that could be developed for neurodiverse parents is that the spouses go along with this training and they say, okay, spouses, it is up to you to, in certain situations, stand up and say, this is, not okay. This is a result of your situation. So here's what we're going to do. Right. Rather than, because she was my dad's helper, my mom was not able to help us. So, right, it's like the spouses have to pick sides, whereas, in a situation like that, whereas I think for people who are more enlightened, I guess, in terms of their parenting, then they don't have to pick sides. They can say, okay, this is obviously a result of your symptoms. You're not able to handle X, so let's go to this strategy A. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that helps. That helps.
Yeah. And they were together for a very long time, right? We're talking, was it 40 or 50 years? Is that right?
Yeah, I'd have to do the math on it, but you're right, about 42, something like that.
Yeah.
45, like that. Yeah, a long time. And they were really devoted to each other. I think my dad just was, he found solace in my mom. In other words, a haven. He really did. If you have trouble emotionally and with communication, and you find one person, he just really loved her. And I think that was always really good about my parents. They really did show one another a lot of love.
Right. Speaking about your father, what were some things that you feel you have in common with him? Because I know that there are some attributes that we take from our parents, and I think you mentioned that he was a very physically active person. He was committed to his health, and he watched what he ate and things like that. Do you feel that he taught you that, and you really taken the importance of physical activity and making that a part of your life?
Honestly, I think that genetically he was wired to move and I was wired to move, so I just inherited it. And so it was good. Your parents reinforce what perhaps you already have naturally, and so that was probably true for me as well. So seeing him active at a time where you didn't see a lot of people, this was before Jane Fonda, and so forth. So him getting out to do his runs and so forth was really. It was good and it was considered normal. And so, but it's like, he probably used it to soothe himself right? It's a great way to get out stress and so forth. And I probably did the same thing and have done. I consider it to be a really a huge stress reliever.
Yeah.
And I just physically have a hard time sitting, so it's like, I guess it's possible I have ADHD too. I was never assessed, but my kids were, and they both were, so it seems logical. And ADHD, for your listeners, is considered a neurodiverse condition. There are a number of neurodiverse conditions. You don't even think about it. Mental illnesses like anxiety and depression, physical conditions like stroke or Down syndrome. You have learning disabilities like dyslexia. Those are all considered neurodiverse conditions. So when you start looking around you, it's like everybody has a neurodiverse family member somewhere, whether it's in your nuclear family or extended family. Somewhere they're there.
Absolutely.
Need a little extra help.
Yeah. And there was a very interesting generational aspect of this too, where you weren't just looking back at your relationship with your own parents and your father specifically, but you're also near the conclusion of the book, you start to look forward and the relationship that you've had with your children and how that's sort of been affected by this condition. And I'm curious if you could share a few thoughts on the lessons learned and sort of the things that changed from those realizations.
So I think that was probably by far the most painful part of the process, is understanding that because I didn't have a model for getting emotionally bonded to my parents, that I was unable to offer that to my kids. I bonded with my sisters, my two sisters, who were instrumental. And if you don't bond with your kids, that is something that you can't back up. There's no do-over. And so I make that really clear in there. And so trying to not only see how you may have harmed them, as well as to forgive yourself for it, was, by far super painful.
Yeah.
It was hard to deal with. But then I mentioned in the book that one of the things that helped me was reading Kristen Neff's book on self-compassion, the proven power of being kind to yourself. And it really was a shocker in terms of how terrible I was to myself. I was a true meanie and bully, and everything I did, I had this little voice in my head: "You stupid, you're selfish. Why'd you do that? How come you didn't see that?" and so forth. And so she teaches you how to be kind to yourself and to realize that every single thing people do is a means of survival. And so whatever manner of behavior that they choose to do or is really based on a real and very human emotion. You are humiliated, or you are nervous, or you feel really bad for somebody else. And those are all really good things. So once you understand perhaps the bad behavior, you actually look at that it was a really good and worthy foundation that led to that. So you didn't do the right thing, but it was because of X, X, and X. And it was crazy. So I'm much kinder to myself now, and that really improved my life a lot. Therapy improved my life a lot. If I could give a gift to every single person, it would be therapy.
Yeah.
Because everybody, I used to be that person. I'd be like, I'm fine. I don't need any help. And only to discover that you don't need any help until you do. And every single person needs help. And I don't care who you are. You know what I mean? If you might not feel like you need help now, but there's going to be a point where you need it. So if you can, reach out and take that help.
Yeah. And you had a very impactful moment in the book, one of many, but I thought that this was also just as informative as it was impactful, because you had finally made the choice and you documented the choice to pursue therapy. And when you got to that point, with all the strength that you needed to get to it, there was still a lesson to learn there. And I'm curious if you could share that, because I thought that was a very revealing in terms of the kind of strength that you need to pursue this, but the strength that is within you to make that change, about confronting or standing up for the kind of care that you need.
Yeah, that was actually really interesting. I think what you're referring to is the first time I ever went for therapy.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I think it was. I typically, because I have a journalism background, I'll typically actually prepare for things. So prepare for meetings. I will get some background and I will go in with questions. But I was in such a psychological mess that I didn't do that. And instead, what I went with this idea, this one person is going to magically take away all of my angst. And so I didn't prepare. And I didn't have an idea of what I wanted and what it should look like. And so I went in and talked to this woman who said she had, even though she had, nobody had any experience of dealing with the neurotypical kids of neurodiverse parents. Even though articles had been written about it, there was nobody specialized. It was super frustrating. In any case, I went to her and she's like, I had a person, my stepson is on the spectrum. And so, okay, that's good. In any case, she, in the first 15 minutes, she talked only about herself. And so in those 15 minutes, I come in and I am a over full glass, ready to spill. Yeah. Please I need to release, let this spill out. And then she just starts talking about herself. And I'm like, wow, this isn't correct. And she, and then she said, I think I know what's wrong. She said, I think you're, and I said, oh yeah, what? And she said, I think you're on the spectrum. And it was a moment where literally, if she had slapped me hard across the face, that would have been better, because I was coming to get relief from being misunderstood because of my own parents' autism. And then which I would never have experienced. I mean, that's one of the most interesting things, is that if I were autistic, I would not have had this problem probably, because my own communication system, I would probably recognize that in my autistic parent and there would be no problem. But that was the problem, is because mine diverged from my parent. That was the problem. And in any case, I stormed out of there and I was super upset. Not only that, for your folks who are listening, is that I realized and told her that she didn't have the right to assess. You have to be credentialed to actually assess a person for a neurodiverse condition. You can't just proclaim it. So don't let anybody diagnose you who doesn't have the proper credentials. So in any case, and I only knew this because my sister is a speech pathologist and works with a lot of autistic kids, or did. She's since retired. But so I knew this, but other people who don't may not realize that. So definitely realize that. But in any case, after that, it taught me, it's like, no, why would you ever go to somebody without knowing what you want and what you're looking for? And so I went to the next therapist, and then she soon retired, and I went to a next therapist. And every time I did, I got a better idea of what I'm looking for. And it really helps to understand that if you're trying to progress yourself, in therapy, it's not enough to just go and complain. I felt that. That's good for like a session or two. But really, you need to be able to progress yourself through some means of gauging your improvement. You want to be able to see signs of improvement, right? I know people who've been in therapy for years and they're like, it's not working. So what I did, for example, is take Kristen Nuff's book on self-compassion. And I worked through chapter by chapter. And every time I hit something that I wanted or a question I had, that's I would write it down and I would take it to the therapist so that we could have a direct discussion, not just about anything, how things are going or anything. And I was learning the whole time. So you have to set yourself tasks to actually learn, because learning is the only way it's going to increase your understanding of what happened, but also give you insights on to how to help yourself. And you can't lay it on somebody else to say, yeah, it's your job to fix me up. That's not going to happen. It's like you have to be really proactive in fixing yourself. And so, so I mentioned to you that I'm also a personal trainer, and so the two work directly in parallel. I teach folks that yes, you can go to a personal trainer and you can say, hey, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. But unless you're actually learning a process for dealing with how to progress yourself, you will never gain the tools necessary to progress yourself. Right? You will always be reliant on that person, and so there you go. So that's what I did. I used those skills, right?
Yeah. Thanks for that. At this time, I'd like to ask you if you could do another reading, because I think this one is one of the. I actually think this is such a beautiful passage, but it's an incredible piece of writing here that you did around page 50. The emotional disconnect that may have occurred when I was young, if you could. Yeah. And as a little bit of background for folks, they have done, and I allude to the studies in the book, that your self-esteem is set when you're very young, not when you're 10 or whatever. It starts, pretty much from the moment you're born. And so this is kind of based on that. Envision I'm a baby of between 6 months and a year old. I'm sitting on a floor in a white-walled room. A man stands before me. Beside me is a thing people sit on. I recognize the man. He's somehow connected to the woman who feeds and dresses me. I don't have a name for him or her or the chair because I'm so young. But I know the man and woman from the chair. They're like me. They move and make noise. What they do determines how I feel, happy, scared, sad, or any variety of other emotions for which I have no names. I rely on people's eyes for clues about whether they'll be mean or nice to me. That's why I'm waiting for the man to look at me. I want an idea of what he'll do. The fact he hasn't looked at me yet makes me anxious because it's unusual. I've noticed when the woman walks in, she looks at me immediately. Then she smiles and picks me up. Sometimes she jiggles me around while making faces, and I feel warm inside and laugh. After studying the room, the man lowers his eyes toward me. They reach my head and without stopping move down my face and body, then slide sideways to the chair. Something happened, though I don't know what. His eyes pass mine with no pause or smile or interest. He looks at the chair the same way. If he's important to me somehow, he must know what's what. If he treats me like a chair, I must be like a chair, a thing, no worse, no better. And that's, as I had mentioned, that I wrote that section because it's really hard to convey this sense of being treated like you're nothing. Like, in other words, there was no I'm sure no thought on my dad's part. He's like, oh, I'm going to look at this child and treat them like nothing. It's the impairment of that communication system that caused that. But essentially, that's what it did. It gives you this. It gives a child this feeling like they are there. There's no need for discussion because there's nothing to discuss. There's this thing. Right, and this thing is part of my environment. And it's hard to, and I go into explain exactly how difficult it is to realize that,
trying to realize that I was nothing, that it felt like nothing was, again, a really shocking thing.
Yeah.
You have to develop very elaborate psychological structures to cocoon yourself from this very big secret about yourself, that if anybody were to get inside, they would see nothing. It would be vacant. It would be a void.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons I did that section, is that I believe that kind of emotional separation happens from birth. From birth, if the parent doesn't know how to properly handle and emotionally bond with their kid.
Yeah.
So
it's such a powerful moment, and to me, I think it exemplifies the core of the disconnect, the misunderstanding, that happens in those situations. And it feels like that is only possible when you've done the work, when you have gone through so much, when you've had enough distance from the situation that you were able to so elegantly describe that relationship in the way that is. But if I may ask specifically, like a technical thing on this segment, when did you write this in the process of putting the book together?
This was actually relatively early. I was essentially dealing in just pieces of this and trying to figure out how to put them together. And that was and I was working with my critique group as well, and they would have problems. Again, they're like, I don't really understand what you were going through. So it's like you have to come up with some sort of technique or method by which you can actually explain what you think happened. And that's the infuriating part of it, is that your memories, that things that you actually remember, don't occur or don't start happening until you're older. So how do you know what happened to you? Right? So I had to more or less just give the feeling of what it was like. And it's there's a mention in my book about the problem. Sometimes autistic people have a flat affect. And what that means is that they might stare at you, right? And that makes people very uncomfortable. That's a socially taboo thing to do. You don't just stare at other people for that reason. But it happens with them just merely because, and that is kind of the idea, is that you're looking at something, but it's not like you're recognizing that person. There's no emotion behind it, right? And so that's what I wanted to kind of convey, and what that can do. And with kids, they don't have, if somebody had told me, that's a symptom, and you're like, oh, okay, I get that. But when you're little like that, there's no words for it. There's nobody to explain it. My mom didn't have any symptoms to explain. Like if she'd been able to say, hey, this is the condition God, this is the symptom God, let's have some safe words. You feel like he's ignoring you or something, come to me and let's talk about that, right?
Right.
So communication, I think, is the best. Little kids read expressions so that they can point to pictures, and this is how I'm feeling, mom or dad. I think those are great. I would have loved that. I would have loved to use that with my kids, and I would have loved, hopefully parents nowadays are doing that. Here's this big chart on the wall. How are you feeling today? You can't, and that way, if you can't express yourself, we might have a problem.
Right. Right. So if I may ask, what has the response been with your family in terms of the work that you've put out into the world, and as you were putting this together, and now that it's seen the light of day, how does your family feel about it?
My, I'm going to say just very supportive, and that's a kind of a limited thing, because primarily the two people I had in mind most were my sisters, and of course their immediate families, especially since I mentioned my nephews in it and so forth by name. So we're really clear. It's like, how you feel about this? I'll change anything you need to, because my sisters they were absolutely my saviors when I was a kid. They were my haven. They were who I went to, and so forth. So there's nothing that I would do to damage that relationship. And so I had to go over, and I was like, is there anything in here which I feel is mean or mean-hearted, mean-spirited, anything that could be interpreted by other extended family members who I don't talk to anymore, but might get a copy. Is there anything in there that could, hurt them? And there isn't. My guess is that, if I had, I don't really know my dad's extended family, and I know my mom's extended family too, but not enough that they would feel, I think, jeopardized by this. So,
right.
Mostly I think if you're, like my dad still has some siblings who are alive, but I don't know them very well. But they'd probably be, kind of, why'd you have to bring this out into the open light? Which is exactly the culture that I told is a very repressive thing. So hopefully they would be like, I'm just sorry that happened. And, I understand. And, hopefully that would be the case, but I don't know.
Right.
In other words, I feel really good about it. And I hope that it inspires other people, especially therapists, to get more information so they can help other people in my situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm certain that it will. I mean, it's just such a peculiar situation, but the more you read into it, the more you realize that there are millions and millions of people who are going through a similar situation as you've documented in the work. Now, I only got 2 more questions for you, to be mindful of your time. And I know we're just scratching the surface with this wonderful work that you put together. And we didn't get a chance to talk about your previous works as well and a lot of the other work that you do. So maybe we'll have to chat some other time. But I'm curious to know how you feel about your relationship with your parents now that you've written this work. I know it's sort of a big general question, but in terms of atonement and healing and looking at what they did for you and how they tried to do the best they could with the resources they had. Now that you've written this, what's that relationship in your mind like?
Well, I think it's funny because the book made me question whether I believe in forgiveness. And I don't necessarily believe in that. Right? Forgiveness, it means that you, to me anyway, and it's possible that other people would disagree, that you could take away what's happened. But I don't think that's true. What I do believe in is understanding. And in other words, when you finally understand what exactly happened, the whole way around it and in depth, and you understand why people did what they did, I do believe in understanding. That essentially deal with what's occurred. And I certainly feel that's the case with my parents. I think that they were just doing the best that they could like parents. And like all parents, they made mistakes. And that's very natural. And I have had to admit that myself. It's just, it was really cathartic, I guess, to understand why they did what they did, and just being these good people, who tried hard, but it didn't work out. That's what happens with parenting. You have they go askew, and I think most families are like that. It doesn't go exactly right, and you have to be able to deal with that, and so that's what I think.
Wonderful. And lastly here, what is it that we'd like to impart to the reader in terms of the disconnect? What are the primary disconnects that we need to make people aware of? What is it that you think is the most important thing that this book has to share with those folks?
Well, I think, first of all, it's getting the idea that it's not those people over there. It's not that family over there. If you look very carefully at your own family, you're going to find these people. And every human interaction you have has some kind of an effect on you. And so it's a matter of kind of reassessing your relationship with them and giving them a little bit more room and flexibility, trying to understand more kind of where they're coming from and strategies for helping them out and so forth. I think that helps a lot, because that's what I would like to get. I used to think that's it's that over there. It's that my dad is having a problem over there. My sister who's got an autistic son, it's her over there. It's not over there. It's right here at home. And once we realize that it's everywhere, it's all these people around us, then we have a much better chance of inclusivity, right? It's not just, there's a strange person over there and we're supposed to be nice to them and pull them in. It's like, no, it's your mother, it's your brother, it's your cousin. It's like, and I think that is what's really important, is that it's around us, it's among us, it's within us, all this neurodiversity. So doing what we can to put names to things, to help people get assessed, to help counselors more effectively deal with the psychological problems that arise amongst families would be ideal. Just let's get more research on neurodiversity and the effects on everybody, not just the neurodiverse person, but the people, the rest of the people in his family. Let's develop strategies for dealing with this, making everybody really happier.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a wonderful, optimistic, beautiful note to end on. But Martha, I want to thank you so much for your vulnerability, for sharing your beautiful story and letting us into your perspective and your world, and for educating me in particular, because this is something that I was not very informed on, but for reminding us that this vulnerability is courage and that we can be better allies and that we can humanize each other a little bit more regardless of what's going on. But thank you for your time, and this has been really a pleasure. So I hope that we get to chat soon about other stuff as well.
I do. We've got a whole long list of other things to talk about, Jaime. Thank you so much for letting me talk.
Wonderful. Well, I will be. Oh, did I lose you?
All right.
I lost you right at the end.
No, I think we're okay. I still hear you.
Okay. So. Well, I hope you have a wonderful Sunday, and I'll be in touch real soon.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jaime. Have a great Sunday. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.